introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by thanking the co-chairs, Professor Cheng Wan Hoon, Professor Daphne Pan, and members of the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts with you. And as Yap Singh has said, I'm going to talk about the student-teacher relationship, which can be a very bothersome aspect of education. To have a clearer perspective of the student-teacher relationship, we need to examine the teaching-learning process. And we all know that there are two parties involved, the student as the learner and the teacher as the educator. They are both engaged in the same activity, but they play different roles, they have different roles, but ultimately they have the same goal, that of ensuring effective student learning. Now, this idea is not new at all. Way back in 1883, Joseph Payne, who was the first professor of the science and art of education, in his opening citation to the College of Preceptors in London, said, if we observe the process which we call instruction, we see two parties conjointly engaged, the learner and the teacher. The object of both is the same, but the relations to the work to be done are different. So this is not a new idea. It's way back in 1883, this has already been commented on. One common perception of the student-teacher relationship is that the student is a customer of the teacher. And the other less common perception is that the student is a partner in learning with the teacher. Depending on what viewpoint you hold, this will have important implications in the way we teach and the way students learn in this 21st century. Let's first look at the student as customer of the teacher. With this model, it means that the student as customer is a client. The teacher then becomes the service provider. As the client, the student has expectations. He pays to receive quality service. He or she is under no obligation to enhance the quality of service, simply a user of the service, and will readily complain of perceived shortcomings. The teacher as a service provider will then have some obligations. Must provide quality service. In education, we talk about content delivery. Tries to please the customer at all times, and is often fearful of customer complaints. So if we look at this perception that the student is a customer of the teacher, it really is very much like, it's a business-like model where the customer is king and customer is always right. What are the educational implications of this perception? Firstly, I think we know that this is consistent with traditional 20th century education, characterized by the highly teacher-directed and highly lecture-based curriculum. In such an environment, the teacher can be equated to a service provider, and the student becomes the passive recipient of abundant factual content, often referred to as simply information. And there is also an assumption made in this model that so long as the service or the content is delivered, the customer will be satisfied. That is, students will readily learn. We know how untrue this is. The student as customer of the teacher can also be equated to the instructional paradigm. And what can we expect as the educational outcomes of this model? In medical education, this has been clearly brought out that it leads to information overload. Information that taxes the memory but not the intellect. This is taken from the document prepared by the General Medical Council of UK. Students become highly teacher dependent on what, how, and when to learn. And in this environment, students' survival instincts become highly primed. They develop habits of rote learning. They memorize, recall, regurgitate. And this is often intensified by tests of factual recall. So I always use this cartoon to depict what traditional 20th century education or in the instructional paradigm is like. I refer to it as the pedagogy of silence is golden, where students see plenty, they hear plenty, but usually say little or nothing. Let's now look at the student as a partner in learning with the teacher. If we take this view, then it means the student and teacher undertake a joint educational venture with shared responsibility in the teaching learning process. The student and the teacher need to jointly nurture and develop a healthy partnership so as to optimize educational outcomes. And this model is better represented by a pedagogical model in which, as a partner, the student plays an active role. The student as a partner in learning can be equated to the learning paradigm. What are the educational implications of such a paradigm? Firstly, it is more consistent with 21st century learning theories and with evidence-based best practices. It is a better educational preparation of students in the 21st century for the challenges and demands on the workforce and also as responsible citizens of the state. How should we educate our students in the 21st century? Firstly, there is now global consensus that 20th century education is no longer adequate to nor appropriate to meet the challenges and demands of a globalized knowledge-based economy in a flat world of the 21st century, which our Deputy President and Provost referred to yesterday in his presentation. Educating our students in the 21st century, I have borrowed this again. This quotation is again from the General Medical Council document, and replace the word doctors with students, it reads well. We can at best strive to educate students capable of adapting to change with minds that can encompass new ideas and developments, and with attitudes to learning that inspire the continuation of the educational process throughout professional life. So as educators, we need to review, reappraise, re-strategize the design and delivery of our curricula to meet the needs of the 21st century. In educating our students for the 21st century, we have to go beyond just content acquisition. We have to equip our students with more enduring educational process and life skills. We have to help our students enhance higher order cognitive skills so that they develop the capability to analyze, integrate, evaluate, and apply knowledge and information to solve problems. We have to help them, we have to nurture the development of soft skills, interpersonal, communication, teamwork skills. these were seldom or never considered in 20th century education. Let me take a pause at this point. I'm sure you know who these two great dancers are. I'm amazed at how technology, I don't know whose body it is really. The two bodies must belong to someone. Let me now continue. So it's quite obvious that the student-teacher relationship in 21st century education needs a paradigm shift. We need to shift from the student as customer to the student as partner in learning. In other words, we need to move from the instructional paradigm to the learning paradigm. A very simple model of the instructional paradigm is shown there. This is the silence is golden pedagogy. And then we move to the learning paradigm. Student as partner in learning should reflect more of this second model of teaching and learning. Let me just elaborate a little bit more on the learning paradigm. The primary focus is on student learning outcomes, not just teacher inputs, which I think Mike has referred to earlier. The student as active learners, not just passive recipients of content. And student acquisition of new enabling competencies, not just content knowledge. The learning paradigm then clearly identifies two important outcomes. The student is his own teacher. Learning is self-teaching. Again, this idea is not new. It was first mentioned by Payne, which I mentioned earlier. The essential part, the appropriation and assimilation of knowledge by the mind, can be performed by no one but the learner. It follows that he is in fact his own teacher. And that learning is self-teaching, way back in 1883. The teacher's part in the process of instruction is that of a guide or superintendent of the operations which the pupil teaches himself. So how can we best implement the learning paradigm? What is the evidence suggests we should use or implement discussion pedagogy, which actually refers to interactive teaching learning. And this is a quotation from Roland Christensen from the Harvard Business School. He says, when the objective is critical thinking or problem solving and the development of qualities such as sensitivity, cooperation, and zest for discovery, discussion pedagogy offers substantial advantages. I would recommend the book. It's called Education for Judgment. It's based mainly on the experiences of his group of teachers in the Harvard Business School. It's an excellent book from which I learned a lot. What are the key features of discussion pedagogy or interactive teaching learning? Well, this is the model I showed you earlier. In other words, students will be actively involved in the teaching learning process. They will be involved in questioning, debating, discussing, clarifying, exploring, problem solving, and trying to reach consensus on an issue or a problem which they're trying to solve. It involves peer teaching and learning. In other words, there will be an all teach, all learn mode. And interactive teaching and learning strategies are consistent with the constructivist theory of learning. Let me just share with you a very concise description of to understand what constructivist theory of learning means. Learners use their own experiences to construct understandings that make sense to them rather than having understanding delivered to them in already organized form. So it's the learners themselves who construct their own understanding and meaning of whatever they are learning. How can we design effective strategies to implement interactive teaching and learning? Well, a commonly used design is that of collaborative learning in small groups. I'm sure all of you have heard of PBL, and TBL is now being getting more and more popular, as I think our friends in Duke NUS Medical School uses TBL as a major part of their delivery of instruction. We all know that in such an environment, the role of the teacher is simply that of the facilitator to expedite the intellectual and interpersonal process for the group. What can we expect as the educational outcomes from interactive teaching and learning? Of course, the primary goal is to go beyond just content knowledge acquisition to the acquisition of more enduring educational process and life skills, which I referred to earlier, higher order cognitive skills, critical thinking, problem solving, and generic soft skills such as interpersonal skills, communication skills, teamwork skills. And if you look at these new skills, they are really skill sets essential for a globalized, knowledge-based economy in the 21st century. Let me just expand a little bit on this issue of generic soft skills. They are important because we want to help our students nurture and develop desired habits of mind, behavior, and action in whatever field they are in. They need to develop desired habits of mind, behavior, and action. And this comment by Gallagher in The Scientist was made very recently, 2007, and he made this in reference to the research environment. Top of the PI wish list, interpersonal skills. Making sure people work well together isn't just the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. That's how important generic soft skills are for 21st century learning. Just two comments to just drive home the point about the need for interactive teaching and learning. Students learn not by just absorbing content, but by critically analyzing, discussing, and using content in meaningful ways. Students need seminars, tutorials, and individualized instruction, not lectures alone, for their reasoning powers to be developed fully. The student as partner in learning is now an imperative for education in the 21st century. It empowers our students to take greater initiative and responsibility to direct and to manage more of their own learning and their educational, personal, and professional development. And in this way, enhancing the capability of our students to meet the challenges and demands of the 21st century. I'd like to add just a little caveat. Although we know, I'm sure you will agree that there is a clear need for partnerships in learning between students and teachers. But to achieve these complex, value-laden goals, both teachers and students must modify their traditional roles and responsibilities. And that's where the difficulty lies. So in summary then, with respect to the student-teacher relationship, a common perception is that the student is a customer of the teacher, and this is akin to a business-like model. The other less common perception is that the student as partner in learning, and this is best represented by a pedagogical model. The student as partner in learning means a joint educational venture, student and teacher entering a joint educational venture with shared responsibility between the two. It's more consistent with education needs of students in a globalized, knowledge-based economy of the 21st century, requires students to be active learners and uses interactive teaching learning strategies to design, deliver instruction to students. Interactive teaching learning strategies represent a shift in educational paradigm from teacher-directed instruction to student-centered learning, is supported by evidence-based best practices, empower students in their learning, enhance student acquisition of more value-added skills beyond just content knowledge. Partnerships in learning between students and teachers must be an imperative for education in the 21st century, will require major mindset change of both teachers and students to ensure its success. Thank you very much.